There are some places in Alabama where the air never forgets what it's heard, where magnolia trees lean too close to the soil as if listening, as if guarding what was buried there. In 1842, near the edge of Clarke County, there once stood a house called Ashford Manor, a plantation so wealthy, it was said even the curtains were lined with imported gold thread, but the people of Ashford never spoke of its twin daughters. And those who did never spoke twice. The Ashford twins, Clara and Margaret, were born on the same night, and as one midwife later whispered under a split moon, a rare celestial sign said to mean two souls, one curse. They were identical mirror images down to the birthmark beneath the left eye, but their hearts were not mirrors. From childhood, they seemed to move in perfect opposition. When Clara prayed, Margaret laughed. When Margaret cried, Clara smiled. In the late summer of 1842, a visitor was brought to the estate, a young man whose name was never written in the records. His presence changed everything. Within 3 months, the house's servants began reporting strange noises at night, voices arguing in perfect unison, doors locking themselves, windows shattering without wind. By winter the magnolias had stopped blooming, and when spring came again, 2 cribs sat in the parlor of Ashford Manor side by side. No one could say who the fathers were. But the midwife, the same one who delivered the twins decades earlier, was found drowned in the well 3 days later. In the spring of 1843, the Ashford estate fell under a silence so thick that even the church bells in Clarke County refused to ring. The twin sisters, Clara and Margaret, had both given birth, but something about those births was wrong. The midwife's journal, the only surviving record, describes the children as arriving at the same hour, but not of the same mother. No one understood what that meant. 2 births, 2 infants, yet one heartbeat, heard through the wall between rooms. When the babies cried, they cried in harmony, perfectly matched, impossible to tell apart. Servants reported seeing both cradles rock at once, even when only one child was inside. By the end of the first week, Clara refused to look at hers, and Margaret began claiming the other child was speaking to her in her dreams. At night, the house filled with the low hum of lullabies sung from nowhere. One maid said she heard 2 voices whispering inside the chimney, the same words, the same rhythm, one just slightly delayed, like an echo following its own source. The Ashford patriarch ordered the nursery sealed, forbidding the sisters from entering together. But it was too late. Whatever was born that spring had already bound them and bound the house itself. When neighbors came calling, they noticed the magnolia blossoms that used to scent the air had all turned brown and heavy, folded inward as if in mourning. No priest would bless the property after that. The church called it superstition, but the servants began to leave one by one, claiming they'd seen 2 infants in one shadow. By midsummer of 1843, Ashford Manor had become 2 houses sharing one roof. The master of the estate, Thomas Ashford, ordered a wall to be built down the center of the upstairs corridor, plaster and timber sealing one twin from the other. He believed separation would stop the sickness, the whispers, the strange synchrony between his daughters. But he misunderstood the nature of what was binding them. Clara was confined to the east wing, her windows facing the river, her child kept under constant supervision. Margaret in the west, her room overlooking the magnolia grove, the one that had stopped blooming months earlier. Servants said that at night, when one twin stirred, the other's candle flickered to life. When Margaret screamed in her sleep, Clara's walls bled condensation so thick it ran like tears. One carpenter who worked on the dividing wall left a note before vanishing. They don't talk through words. The wall breathes between them. 3 nights after the wall's completion, the patriarch awoke to a sound, a single knock from inside the plaster. Then another, then hundreds, spreading across the hall like trapped hands. He ordered the house emptied by dawn, but when the servants gathered in the courtyard, both sisters were standing at the balcony, each cradling a child wrapped in identical white cloth. They didn't speak, they only turned toward each other, and began to hum the same lullaby the drowned midwife was said to sing on the night they were born. That night, a storm hit Clarke County so violent it uprooted trees across 20 acres. And when it passed, half the wall inside Ashford Manor had collapsed from the inside out. When the storm passed, the air around Ashford Manor felt wrong. The humidity wasn't just in the air, it was in the walls, the floors, the mirrors. Servants said the house breathed, that if you pressed your ear to the plaster you could hear the sound of 2 heartbeats, steady, synchronized, faint but alive. The new pastor of St. Mary's Parish, Reverend Wycliffe, was the first outsider to confront the rumors. In a letter to the Bishop of Mobile dated September 1843, he wrote, "I am convinced that something inside that house imitates the living." He had been summoned to perform a blessing, though neither twin would leave her room. When he sprinkled holy water on the fractured wall, the droplets slid upward, defying gravity, collecting at the ceiling in the shape of 2 circles touching at the edge, like an unbroken chain. The reverend left without finishing his prayer. Days later, his congregation found the church's baptismal water had turned black. Across the town, livestock refused to drink. Infants were born with twin marks along their ribs, and every night at exactly 3:12 a.m., the church bell rang once, though no one was in the tower. Locals began to call it the mirror curse, but one elderly servant who'd remained at the estate insisted otherwise. He said it wasn't a curse, it was a calling back, 2 souls trying to find each other no matter what separated them. That winter, Reverend Wycliffe disappeared. His Bible was found near the Ashford property, its pages fused together by moisture, and inside the back cover, written in trembling ink, "The wall is not between them, it's between us." In early 1844, the Diocese of Mobile sent an investigator to St. Mary's Parish to audit its records. The church had begun reporting something unusual. Pages in the baptism and death ledgers were decaying, not with mold, but with moisture that wouldn't dry, as if the paper was breathing humidity from beneath the ink. When the investigator, Elias Crane, arrived, he found the church basement half flooded. The water came from nowhere, clear, still, and cold. The caretaker claimed it began the same night Reverend Wycliffe disappeared. Among the floating pages was the entry for the Ashford family, blurred names, ink dissolved into mirrored blotches. The only legible line read, "Two born, one spirit." Crane salvaged what he could and ordered the ledgers sealed in the rectory attic for preservation. But over the next month, anyone who handled the pages fell ill, complaining of headaches, fever, and hallucinations of whispering voices counting in unison. When the illness spread to the parish school, the bishop issued a decree. All records pertaining to the Ashford estate are to be destroyed and forgotten, for the safety of the congregation. They burned them in a barrel behind the church. The fire wouldn't catch at first. Then suddenly it erupted white flames that produced no smoke. When it was over, ashes clung to the walls in the shape of 2 faces. That same night, across Clarke County, townsfolk reported their mirrors fogging from the inside out. Names appeared in the condensation, always the same 2, Clara, Margaret. By spring, the church basement had fully collapsed into the earth. What lay beneath was described by the foreman as a room that wasn't built by human hands. The diocese denied the claim. But no one ever rebuilt the church. When the foundation of St. Mary's Parish collapsed, workers believed they had struck an old aquifer. But what they found was not water. It was architecture, ancient, deliberate, and completely undocumented. The space beneath the church was no larger than a chapel, built from smooth black stone unlike anything found in Alabama's soil. There were no markings of tools, only a series of circular carvings in the floor, 2 interlocking rings perfectly symmetrical. When touched, the stone walls exuded condensation, warm to the hand as if alive. One laborer said it felt like skin that breathed slowly. At the chamber's center stood a wooden cradle, untouched by rot. Inside it lay 2 small bundles wrapped in linen, empty, weightless, yet soaked through. When the bishop was notified, he ordered the site sealed before sundown. But before they left, the foreman swore he heard crying, 2 voices echoing from opposite ends of the room, answering one another. That night, Clarke County suffered its second great flood in less than a decade. The river near Ashford Manor rose 6 feet, swallowing fences and fields. And from that moment on, the manor's eastern wing began to sink. The county's engineers blamed the shifting soil, but a letter found decades later, written by the same bishop, tells a different story. The room beneath the parish mirrors the upper house. I believe one was built to contain the other. By 1845, St. Mary's Parish no longer appeared on diocesan maps, and those who visited its ruins claimed to hear the echo of a cradle rocking beneath the ground, even when the earth above lay still. By the winter of 1845, Both children of Ashford Manor had grown old enough to walk. Yet those who saw them insisted it was like watching a reflection move before the mirror had been placed. The physician of Clarke County, Dr. Silas Pennington, was called to the estate after reports that one of the children had fallen ill. When he arrived, he found both infants pale and sweating, their eyes rolling in unison, their pulses rising and falling at the exact same rhythm. He described the phenomenon in his private note. Records the Ashford family later tried to destroy. They share not blood but breath. When one exhales, the other inhales. There is no separation of life, only a division of vessel. Dr. Pennington attempted an examination, but as soon as he touched the first child, the second began to bleed from the nose. When he tried again, both began to laugh, softly in the same cadence. After that night, he refused to return. Within weeks, he abandoned his practice, claiming he'd seen something older than medicine. Servants later reported that the children's eyes changed color throughout the day, sometimes brown, sometimes green, sometimes identical to their mothers. And when one fell asleep, the other began to hum, as if keeping the first awake from afar. Neighbors whispered that the twins had made copies of themselves, but the house staff swore otherwise. They said there weren't two children at all, only one, seen twice. That year, a fire broke out in the manor's east wing. No one was killed, but after it was extinguished, every mirror in the house had cracked down the middle perfectly, symmetrically, without heat distortion. On the night of August 3, 1846, Ashford Manor caught fire, but those who fought the blaze would later swear it was no ordinary fire. It did not consume, it revealed. The flames spread only across the east wing, Clara's half of the house. Yet not a single board turned to ash, the wallpaper blackened but did not peel, the portraits blistered but did not burn. It was as if the house itself rejected destruction. When dawn came, the fire had died on its own. The smoke, lifted to reveal a section of the floorboards, collapsed inward, exposing a hollow space beneath the nursery, one that no blueprint of the estate had ever recorded. Inside, firefighters found a staircase descending into wet clay. And there, beneath the manor, a circular chamber of stone, its walls engraved with the same interlocking rings discovered beneath St. Mary's Parish. In the center of the chamber sat a cradle made of blackened wood, charred but intact. Within it, ashes shaped like two small hands pressed together. The air was suffocatingly humid. One of the rescuers, a man named Jonah Beach, later claimed that when he tried to leave, his reflection lagged behind him and the water pooled on the floor. He described hearing a child's voice whisper from that reflection, "Don't take us apart again." Within a week, Beach fell ill and began speaking in unison with his own echo. His wife said he would wake at night and face the corner, murmuring, "She's coming up the stairs." By September, Clara Ashford was dead, the official cause fever, but the servant said her body was found perfectly cold, her eyes open, her lips moving as if repeating someone else's prayer. After Clara's death, the surviving sister, Margaret Ashford, withdrew completely from public view. Neighbors said she no longer appeared at church. The manor gates rusted shut, the cotton fields overgrew. But inside those locked rooms, Margaret was writing. Between 1847 and 1848, a series of 12 letters were sent to the Diocese of Mobile, addressed to whichever hand holds the key. None were signed, but the handwriting matched Margaret's surviving correspondence. Each letter began the same way: to confess is to divide is to live twice. The letters described nightly visitations, a figure shaped like her sister, appearing in the hallway mirror just before dawn, carrying a child that never stopped breathing. Margaret claimed she could hear her own heartbeat coming from outside her body. In one letter, she wrote, "She speaks through the walls now. When I pray, she prays louder. When I stop, she begins. I do not know which of us is heard." The final letter arrived sealed with a fingerprint in soot. Inside was a single page, almost unreadable beneath water stains. "The cradle is not a cradle, it is a doorway. I can hear her knocking from below." After that, the letters ceased. When a priest finally visited the property in the spring of 1849, he found the manor empty. No servants, no horses, no sign of Margaret, only a Bible lying open on the parlor floor, the ink melted by moisture. It was turned to the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 18, verse 19. Again I say unto you, that if two of you shall agree on earth as touching anything that they shall ask, it shall be done for them of my Father which is in heaven. In the margin, written in trembling hand, we ask to be one again. In the spring of 1850, the Clarke County Probate Office authorized a team of appraisers to enter Ashford Manor. The property had stood abandoned for nearly a year, yet neighbors insisted they saw lamps flickering inside after midnight. Among the 3 men sent to catalog the estate was Samuel Heller, a war veteran turned surveyor. His notes, preserved in the county archives, describe a house that still sweated through the plaster, and floors that pulsed faintly as though breathing. When they reached the nursery, everything was untouched. The air smelled of lilies long dead, and in the center of the room, beneath a film of dust, stood a single wooden cradle. It rocked gently, though no wind entered the room. When Heller approached and set his hand upon it, the cradle knocked back, 3 taps from within, perfectly measured. He thought it was a trick of old wood until the cradle began to rock harder in rhythm with his own heartbeat, then stopped. When he bent to look inside, the lining was wet, fresh though untouched for years. The other 2 men reported hearing faint laughter beneath the floorboards, and when they pulled up a loose plank, water began to rise, clear and cold, filling the room ankle deep. Panicked, they fled the manor. Only Heller looked back. He later wrote, "In the window of the east wing, 2 shapes watched us go, one in white, one in black, both holding the same child." A week later, Samuel Heller drowned in his own well. His wife claimed that before his death, he began setting 2 plates at dinner and whispering prayers in perfect unison with someone she couldn't see. Samuel Heller's death forced Clarke County to act. A formal inquest was ordered, not into his drowning, but into the property he died investigating. For the first time, Ashford Manor was entered under the authority of the state. The inquest, held on May 12, 1850, included the county judge, 2 deputies, and a clerk named Eleanor Bryce, a young woman known for her precision. Her transcripts are the only surviving account. She writes that upon entering the manor, the air grew so dense her ink refused to dry on the page. Every line she wrote bled into 2. In the official record, her handwriting appears double, each letter shadowed by a faint replica, offset by half a second. The judge questioned the servants who once lived there. Most refused to speak. One, an elderly groundskeeper named Elias, said quietly, "There's no curse in that house. There's a memory that won't forget itself." When they descended to the basement, the deputies reported hearing whispers through the brickwork, voices speaking backwards echoing through hollow pipes. The judge ordered the area sealed, but that same night the courthouse itself flooded. The water rose only in one room, the record office. All the documents from the Ashford inquest were destroyed, except one. In 1901, during a courthouse renovation, workers discovered a sealed glass jar inside the east wall of the foundation. Inside it was Eleanor Bryce's final page, preserved and dry. On it she had written, 2 witnesses, 2 verdicts, 1 truth. They were never 2 at all. Her death certificate lists drowning, but her body was found in a locked archive room, lungs filled not with water, but with air that smelled of lilies and smoke. After the county sealed the Ashford files, the story might have ended, but legends draw curiosity the way wounds draw flies. In the summer of 1851, a traveling photographer named Nathaniel Greaves arrived in Clarke County carrying one of the earliest wet plate cameras. His intent was to capture the ruins of Ashford Manor before nature swallowed them. He did not return unchanged. Greaves was known for his precision. He kept meticulous journals noting exposure times, lens distances, even the temperature of the chemicals. On June 4th, he made 6 plates of the manor, 3 of the exterior, 3 of the nursery. The exterior plates came out normal, the interior plates did not. In every image of the nursery, a second exposure appeared beside the cradle, faint but unmistakable. 2 women, identical, standing shoulder to shoulder. Their faces were blurred, but their eyes looked directly into the lens, as if aware of being seen. When Greaves tried to recoat the glass, the collodion refused to set, and within minutes, the silver nitrate bath turned black, as though devoured from within. That night he developed the remaining plates by lamplight. The final image showed not two women but four figures, two adults, two infants, reflected in opposite directions, like mirrored halves folding into themselves. Greaves locked the negatives in his case and left Clarke County before dawn. He never photographed again. Years later, his daughter found his journals, every page covered in a single sentence written over and over. They are still developing. The glass plates were later recovered by a collector in Mobile. When examined under ultraviolet light in the 20th century, experts confirmed something inexplicable: the shadows in the photograph had depth. The figures weren't printed on the glass, they were inside it. In 1903, more than half a century after the fall of Ashford Manor, the glass plates resurfaced. They were purchased by Dr. Alton Redd, a physician from Mobile and an amateur historian fascinated by unexplained southern hauntings. He would not live to finish his research. Redd stored the plates in his home laboratory, a second-floor study lined with jars, specimens, and mirrors. For the first few weeks, he noted nothing unusual. Then, in a letter to a colleague, he wrote, "At certain hours, the reflections inside the glass shift slightly, as if the subjects are repositioning themselves." Neighbors reported that at night his windows glowed with a faint blue light. And sometimes a woman's voice could be heard whispering. Though Redd lived alone, one of his housekeepers, a woman named Eula Franks, claimed she saw Dr. Redd standing in front of the largest plate, speaking to his own reflection, answering questions only he could hear. She said his mouth and the reflections moved out of sync. On the night of August 19th, Redd was found dead in his study. His watch had stopped at 3:12 a.m. The same hour the church bell of St. Mary's was once said to toll on its own. All the mirrors in the room were shattered from the inside out. The glass plates, however, remained perfectly intact, but they had changed. Each now bore a faint new detail. Behind the twin women stood a third figure, featureless, leaning forward as though pressing its face against the inside of the glass. The coroner's report mentioned an anomaly. Redd's pupils had turned silver, gray, as if reflecting something unseen. The plates were seized by the Mobile Historical Society and placed in storage. Over the next decade, 3 archivists resigned, citing persistent whispers from the vault. Each described the same sound, 2 voices murmuring the word mirror. The Mobile Historical Society thought they could contain it, but no one has ever contained memory. It moves through walls, through names, through bloodlines until it finds someone who will listen. By 1912, the Society had built a subterranean archive beneath its main building. A reinforced vault intended for preserving Confederate records, plantation deeds, and rare photographs. The Ashford plates were placed inside Vault C9, sealed in a lead-lined box marked Unidentified Rural Estate, Clarke County, 1851. The archivists who worked down there began reporting symptoms, not haunting, infection. Nosebleeds, tremors, sudden flashes of other rooms, other centuries. One clerk, Thomas Lee, described seeing a pair of identical girls standing on either side of the stairwell, like reflections waiting for me to blink. The Society's director dismissed it as imaginative hysteria. But on March 3, 1913, Lee vanished. His desk was found overturned, his shoes left neatly by the vault door. And on the wall above them, scratched into plaster with what appeared to be fingernails, were the words, "The floor remembers the weight." When the vault was reopened, the archivists discovered the lead box had softened, not melted, softened. Its surface rippled like mercury, as though breathing. The plates inside emitted a faint warmth, and one, the largest, had developed new architecture, walls, corridors, staircases spiraling downward. Experts examined it, convinced the image was a chemical fault. But when enlarged under a microscope, tiny writing appeared on one wall of the captured building. 3 words, faded, almost invisible: "Ashford still stands." 2 weeks later, during a thunderstorm, the Society's building flooded from below. The only room left untouched was Vault C9, and those who entered afterward said they heard dripping water, but there were no leaks, only footsteps moving back and forth behind the photographs, as if someone were still pacing the house that no longer existed. By 1924, the ruins of Ashford Manor had almost disappeared beneath vines and red clay, but the earth does not forget what was built on it. It only waits until the living are foolish enough to dig again. That year, a team of University of Alabama archaeology students, working under the pretense of a historical land survey, arrived to map what was left of the Ashford property. Their journals were never published, but fragments of their notes survive. The lead surveyor, Professor Hiram Oates, wrote that the soil beneath the manor's foundation was layered strangely, as if three separate structures had been constructed, each atop the remains of the previous. Each with identical floor plans, each smaller than the one before it, like a nesting doll collapsing inward. On the second day, one of the students, Evelyn Doss, reported finding something impossible: a section of floorboards buried beneath 10 feet of dirt. Still intact, still warm, when Oates struck the boards with his pick, they echoed as if a hollow chamber lay below. Moments later, the earth gave way. He fell through into darkness, not into open soil, but into a room. 4 walls, timber still damp, wallpaper peeling in ribbons, and on the far side of that room, faint light reflected off glass. Oates approached it and realized he was standing above the mirrored nursery from the photographs. But this time there were no portraits, only 2 empty cradles perfectly preserved, as though time itself had refused to touch them. In his final entry, scrawled hastily against the page, he wrote, "The house has no foundation. The house is its own reflection." The excavation was sealed within a week. The university claimed structural instability, but witnesses say when they filled the pit with soil, the ground pulsed like a slow heartbeat beneath their feet. And for nights afterward, the clay stayed warm, as if something beneath was still alive, still waiting for the floor to remember its weight. What happens when a story begins to recognize the one telling it? When what was buried no longer lies below but behind you, breathing in rhythm with your own. After the collapse of the Ashford dig, only 3 members of Professor Oates's team returned to campus. Within weeks, all 3 exhibited identical symptoms: night terrors, facial twitches, spontaneous nosebleeds, and a strange compulsion to draw. They all sketched the same thing: a mirror cracked into 2 halves, reflecting a face that was not quite theirs. Evelyn Doss was the first to speak openly. She told colleagues she kept seeing someone walking through her reflection, a figure with her eyes but not her expression. When she touched her own image in the mirror, the glass was cold, but when she pulled away, her fingertips were wet. Doctors diagnosed psychogenic delusion. The university quietly dismissed the case, but a janitor who cleaned her dorm room after she disappeared wrote a note later included in the coroner's file: "The mirrors fogged up from the inside, and when I wiped them clean, the girl was still there." The other survivors followed her soon after. One stepped in front of a train, the other vanished after breaking into the university archives, found weeks later, catatonic, whispering, "There's another floor beneath the floor." When their belongings were collected, investigators found among them a photographic slide, one of the missing Ashford plates, but under modern analysis, the image had shifted. Where once stood the twin women and their cradle, there now appeared a third reflection. A modern excavation team frozen mid-dig, their faces turned toward the lens, including Evelyn, Professor Oates, and the others. The date etched at the bottom of the glass read 1851. Narrator lower, almost trembling, "It wasn't a haunting, it was a recursion. The land had begun to remember the ones who came to remember it." A soft knocking begins, rhythmic. 1 knock, then 2, then a pause. The same pattern repeats, closer now. In Clarke County, reflections began to disappear, first from the manor, then from the vault, and finally from the town itself. By the winter of 1925, residents of Millhaven, the nearest township to the Ashford ruins, began filing strange complaints to the sheriff's office. Mirrors were turning black. Pond water no longer reflected the sky. And when people looked into glass, they said the light stopped halfway, as though something behind the surface was swallowing it whole. A barber named Jonas Hilt reported his first incident while shaving a customer. Halfway through, he saw that the man's face, visible only inches away, had vanished from the mirror entirely. Only the barber's own hands remained, gliding through empty air. Moments later, the customer collapsed, his throat slit open, though the blade never touched him. That week, Millhaven's church covered every reflective surface in black cloth. Even windows, they said light itself had become unclean. A preacher, Reverend Clancy, tried to bless the nearby creek where the water first turned opaque. Witnesses claimed he bent to touch its surface and screamed. When they pulled him back, the skin of his palm was missing, peeled away cleanly as if dissolved. By March, the town's remaining population began to flee, but travelers passing through spoke of something stranger: houses still standing, chimneys still smoking, but no people anywhere inside. And when headlights swept over the windows, they didn't reflect glass, they reflected faces. Familiar faces, the same ones seen in the Ashford plates, multiplied and distorted, twin after twin after twin. The final report from Millhaven's mayor was a single page mailed to the state capitol. The reflections left us first. Then our shadows began to lag behind. No recovery teams ever returned. The town was wiped from Alabama's register the following year. The official cause: chemical seepage from the excavation site. But everyone who has ever seen the Ashford photographs knows better. The images were never confined to glass. The bell of St. Mary's had not tolled since 1863. Its tower collapsed during the fire that ended the Ashford line. But on the evening of May 2nd, 1926, a sound was heard rolling over the abandoned fields. Not a bell ringing, a bell unringing, each chime folding in on itself, time reversing like a wound stitching itself shut. The only living witness was Deputy Harold Monroe, a surveyor assigned to confirm Millhaven's evacuation. He kept a notebooks, mole black leather, now preserved in the Clarke County archives. In it, he described driving through the fog and hearing the bell not from above, but from below. He followed the sound to the ruins of St. Mary's, half swallowed by the earth. The ground there had shifted since the flood, and beneath the cracked floorboards of what was once the nave, Monroe found a staircase descending into blackness, lined with damp stone. He lit a match. There were symbols carved into the walls, twin circles joined by a single spine. Between them, he thought he saw faces pressed into the rock, like fossils of the newly dead. At the staircase's end, he reached a chamber flooded ankle, deep with water. Suspended from the ceiling by rusted chains hung the church bell. But it wasn't metal anymore. It was glass, its surface faintly silvered, its interior swirling with shadow. When Monroe stepped closer, the bell began to hum. And within it, faint reflections appeared: two women, holding infants, their mouths opening and closing in opposite rhythms. Each word they spoke formed frost on the glass. We were never born. We were only repeated. The bell's tone reversed again, pulling the air out of the room. Monroe dropped his lantern. It shattered, igniting the water, and for a moment, the chamber glowed like liquid silver. He crawled back to the surface, half blind, his skin blistered. In his final note, written before he died of fever days later, he scrawled, the bell wasn't ringing time backward, it was calling something up. When officials returned weeks later, the ruins were gone. No church, no bell, just a mirror-shaped depression in the soil filled with still, colorless water. And if you stood at its edge, you didn't see your reflection, you saw someone watching you from the other side. It began, as all hauntings do, with something that pretended to be ordinary. In August of 1937, nearly a century after the Ashford twins drew their last breath, 2 births occurred in Clarke County Hospital. 2 infants, 2 mothers, 2 different days, but the hospital records show something impossible: the same birthmark, the same blood type, the same pulse. Nurses noticed first. Both babies bore a faint, crescent-shaped scar beneath the left collarbone, not a wound, but something grown into the flesh. Both emitted a low hum when they slept, a vibration in the chest like the resonance of struck glass. The attending physician, Dr. Wallace Crane, attempted to dismiss the coincidence until he read the mothers' names: Margaret Doss and Eleanor Doss, distant descendants, barely traceable, of Evelyn Doss, the missing archaeologist from the Ashford dig. He ordered separate care wards, hoping to avoid scandal, but overnight, both infants' cribs shifted toward the center of the room. The nurses swore they hadn't moved them. In the morning, the newborns were lying side by side, hands clasped, breathing in perfect synchronization. When Dr. Crane tried to separate them, the hum grew louder, a frequency so low it cracked a pane of the observation window. Both babies opened their eyes at the same moment. And for a fraction of a second, witnesses saw one face, split perfectly down the middle, mirrored along a single, trembling line. Within hours, the hospital's power grid failed. A nurse found the maternity wing lights flickering in reverse rhythm, brightest during power loss, darkest when the generators engaged. She said it was as though something was feeding off the interruption. The infants were transferred to separate orphanages. One to Mobile, one to Selma, but records end there. Both institutions burned within a year, fires that left no remains, only melted glass pooled across the floors, and yet, decades later, photographs began surfacing in family attics, county fairs, and church rosters. Each time a different child, each time the same eyes, each time the faint crescent scar. Narrator lower, almost trembling, they weren't born into time. Time was born through them. The heartbeat slows and stops, then a second heartbeat begins, faster, overlapping, like two hearts learning to share one body. History does not move forward, it circles. Every unburied secret drags its reflection behind it until the reflection learns to walk on its own. In 1950, a sociologist from Auburn University, Dr. Miriam Kell, began documenting reports of genetic anomalies within isolated southern bloodlines. Her research took her to Clarke County, a place the state no longer recognized, a place erased from maps but still found by those who dreamed of it. Among her interviews were 3 families who claimed descent from the Ashford line. All bore similar traits: unusual symmetry of facial structure, reflective sensitivity to light, and in several cases, identical birthmarks. But what Dr. Kell couldn't explain was the repetition. Generations born decades apart, reappearing. The same faces resurfacing in old photographs again and again, unchanged. When she assembled the photographs on her office wall, a pattern emerged. The faces aligned, overlapping perfectly, the children of different eras merging into one unbroken lineage. And at the center, faintly visible in the composite, were 2 women standing shoulder to shoulder. Dr. Kell's notes stopped mid-sentence on the night of June 6th. Her apartment was found empty, her desk covered in cracked mirror shards, each one reflecting a different image of the same face, hers, but older, younger, multiplied. In her last recorded tape, a whisper rises beneath the static. The reflection doesn't need glass anymore. Local folklore says that when lightning strikes near the Ashford fields, you can see, just for a moment, the silhouette of a house that isn't there, windows glowing, a bell beneath the earth humming like a heartbeat. And if you listen closely, you'll hear 2 voices speaking as one: "We never died. We were only remembered too well." The final sound, the slow toll of a bell once, then twice, echoing backward into silence. Then faintly, the sound of 2 infants crying in unison, fading beneath the static hiss. Narrator whisper, final, and so the story closes where it began, not with death, but with repetition, because what we call history is only the echo of what refuses to stay buried.